Hi, I'm Donovan, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of an introduction to why prayer and meditation and embodied mindfulness practices might be good for our brain, or can be good for our brain in times like the ones we're living through right now. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you just a little bit of tools, and we'll do an embodied practice as well as part of this experience together. So I wanted to just share this with you, in that I was invited to put this together and share this with some friends at a local wellness center, residential center. And for those, some folks may find prayer to be something that feeds their spiritual life. For those who maybe have a different sort of belief or aren't sure about that, these practices can be good for the brain's recovery from trauma and to help us deal with stress, regardless of what our traditions, practices, or beliefs are. So that's what I'm going to share here, and I'm going to draw a little bit from some work that's been around, some neuroscience, including some brain scan imaging that's been done of people, again, regardless of what their traditions and practices were, regardless of what their beliefs were, showing the ways that prayer and meditation simply affect the brains, ways that we can use to help our own recovery and resilience. So what I'm showing you here is drawing from the work of the scientists who did the book, Why God Won't Go Away. And you may or may not believe that, but the point is that they did research that, again, it wasn't only from theists, it was some folks that did not believe in God continued to show either way that the practice of meditation, the practice of prayer, for folks while they were doing it, and in terms of long-term effects, had some beneficial effects on their brain that can be measured. So that's what I'm going to show you here. I'm going to show you a couple of slides. This first one, on both slides, it compares and it shows from different perspectives that there are similar effects that Tibetan Buddhist monks who were meditating experienced, and that Franciscan nuns who were praying in a theistic way, God-centered way, also experienced. So again, regardless of their traditions, regardless of their cultural backgrounds, gender, that they were doing different practices, silence or words, these things had some differences, but things that could be measurably shown to help the brain in both cases are the things are also here. That's what we're going to look at. So on this slide, what we're looking at is that in both cases, in both groups, whether they were praying or meditating, whether it was in a Buddhist perspective or a Christian perspective, folks were able to become less focused on and less affected by what was going on outside of them. So where it shows on both these brain scans orientation area, what it's showing is that on the left-hand side in both groups, this is what their brain looked like before they started to meditate or pray. The red areas are activity. And you can see in both cases on the right-hand side, whether they were meditating or whether they were praying, the red activity, the red lessens. And so this area where they're aware of what's going on around outside them, where they are in space, where they're located, there's less activity there. Correspondingly, there's more activity in both cases. Again, this slide is laid out the same way with the Tibetan Buddhist monks on the left and the Franciscan nuns on the right. There's more activity in the area of the brain where the red is there, where they're focusing their attention on what they choose to focus their attention on at this time. So they're drawing attention away, activity away from the part of the brain that's affected by external circumstances, and they're increasing activity in the area where they're choosing to focus. So it's neutral, but it's something that we can use for our resilience and our recovery. An additional thing that you'll see on the right-hand side with the Franciscan nuns is that they're using forms of embodied mindfulness practices, prayer, that are verbal. So they're using words in their prayer, and so their language center is also activated along with the attention center. And in the work of Dr. Michael Yellowbird, particularly in his lecture, which is free and available, I'd encourage you to check it out if you're interested in this kind of work, applying it to decolonizing and recovery from collective trauma, decolonizing the mind. He shows similar effects of chanted prayer. And particularly singing to the trees, but as he explains in the lecture, this could be any sacred songs, any sacred singing, having that same resilience building and recovery effect on the brains of folks that have experienced and are experiencing collective trauma. So the reason that this works is that the brain and the body are so interconnected. I'm not going to read slides here. If you want to come back and look at this later, you're welcome to do that. I'm just showing you, I'm going to show you some images as well and some graphics that for those of us who are visual learners may make more sense of this, but the brain-body interconnection, one way of talking about it is polyvagal theory. And I'm drawing here on the work of Stephen Porges and more recently Alex Howard, presenting that and sharing that in ways that people can use again for trauma recovery. But basically I want to talk about three states. Basically when we're in a relaxed state and we're in that, what Alex Howard calls that rest and digest, breed and feed type state. You know, we're not necessarily consciously thinking of those things, but when we're in a relaxed state, our brain's way of signaling to the body that we're safe, and our body in turn signaling to our brain that we're safe, it sets our systems in that sort of neutral state where our digestive system is working great and our we're fairly calm, you know, our heart rate's fairly calm, all that sort of thing. We're just in kind of a neutral state. At the cellular level, our cells can grow, they can repair and recover and encourage healing in the body. When we're in that state, in that neutral state, our brain can signal to our body when there's a threat. So the brain can notice and be aware from its neutral state that it's time to shift gears and get either prepare to run or prepare to hide or prepare to fight, right? So that's our sympathetic, the brain from that neutral, safe place of well-being can signal us it's time to ramp up the adrenal system, you know, and we may, if this happens a lot to us, we may chronically feel a bit stressed, anxious, tired and wired at the same time. We're going to talk about that later. That's where maybe using tools of embodied mindfulness like prayer and meditation can really help us out to reset us. In extreme danger, we go past fight or flight into kind of a protective collapse of the body's systems, and only the basic survival mechanisms are left, including with the brain. So this is where using prayer and meditation wouldn't be so useful, especially because when we're in this state, in a really extreme danger state, our body kind of goes into a freeze and shutdown state, and we can't really we can't direct our mind very well to do anything. Our language centers usually go offline, so verbal prayer is definitely not going to work in this state. Again, so if the goal here for using prayer and meditation would be to help us when we're in what I'm showing you here is the parasympathetic wellness and recovery state. The neutral state can help us maybe stay there or just be aware that we're in this safe state, and focus our attention on it. And we can also use it when we're in that milder stress response, when we're just in that, getting into that fight and flight mode, we can help ourselves de-escalate back down into that parasympathetic state. So this graphic's a little hard to see, but what I'm trying to show you is on the blue side here is just showing you how the systems respond to a little bit of stress. And this comes from trauma recovery yoga training. If you're interested in trauma recovery yoga, they use this science to engage with mindful movements. There's a lot of it for free on the internet, and you can also work with individual instructors and classes and things like that. But anyway, the point is the stress response on the left-hand side in the blue there, that's when our pupils dilate so that we can see more, our bronchial tubes dilate, where our salivation and digestion they kind of slow down, our stress hormones get released, our sweat glands get activated, our bladder relaxes, so we might void our bladder if we're really stressed, our rectum closes, and there's this just general kind of constriction going on the other. So what we're trying to do when we do any kind of mindfulness practice, whether it's mindful movements or meditation or prayer, is we're trying to help the body know that it's safe, so we can use these bodily signals of our wellness state to kind of let the brain know, hey, we're okay. And likewise, it kind of creates a different loop. And then the brain knows when, if I'm breathing more slowly and I'm opening my eyes wider, wait, those are things I only do when I'm safe. So it kind of helps the brain send those signals to the body to continue to slow the systems down and ramp back down from that adrenalized state, if that makes sense. All of that is sort of, it's one way that's described as polyvagal theory, right? So it's the vagus nerve that signals our heart, our lungs, our digestive tract, whether we're safe or not, and how to respond accordingly. So on the, trying to keep with the same color and setup of the previous slide, on the left-hand side, we have what's, toxic stress when we're aroused, when we're activated. Stress becomes toxic when it's going on for a long period of time. Like we've been in that culturally for a while now with COVID, with the political situation, with many folks have been in it for a really, really long time, with racism, with colonization. There's so much. And when there are not protective, supportive relationships in your life, this will again increase stress to the point that it becomes toxic to you. It has those longer term effects on the body, right? And again, since this little sharing that I'm doing with you right now is about how you can use meditation, mindfulness practices, prayer, even to help your brain-body connection move into more of the positive stress state, which is on the right-hand side, of slowing down the heart rate, decreasing the stress hormones. It's not making these situations go away. So I'm not, this is why I'm sharing this tonight, because it's not a magic cure-all for the situations that we need to change and work together socially and collectively to change. And it's simply building resilience so that we can get through this individually in the meantime and be as well as we are able to be under the circumstances we're in. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what this is about. It's acknowledging that these things are stressful in a toxic way, particularly for folks that don't have protective, supportive relationships in their life at the moment. Tolerable stress is there in the middle. So, we all go through stress at any, that's normal. It's a normal part of life to have some stress. It can be buffered by supportive relationships. And when stress is intermittent or temporary, even when it's serious, it's easier for us to recover. What's been harder of late has been that this has been chronic stress. So I'm just sharing this here. This actually comes from ACE's Connection. There's a lot of shout outs tonight in what I'm sharing. I'm really sharing this not to share my own ideas, but to share the collective wisdom of so many people who've been putting their own work out there lately in this past year to help all of us. So some of those folks are, for example, what I was about to share, ACE's Connection, ACES means adverse childhood experiences. So ACE's Connection, there's a network of providers that uses the adverse childhood experiences instruments for diagnosis and recovery. ACE's Connection, ACE's Network, they are constantly putting out materials, resources, and videos, and webinars, and chances to get together through Zoom, and all kinds of things like that. And this is from one of their workshops for educators. Another thing I wanted to share before I move on is just some words of encouragement that it doesn't take very long to shift from one of those forms, from the stress response into the neutral or the wellness response. Likewise, it doesn't take very long before our body signals to our brain that we're stressed, and then that in turn compounds signals to other systems in the body. Hey, we're in a stress state. We need to change accordingly. So I just want to talk you through this from a minute. This comes from Ayurvedic doctor Christy Smurl of Healthier Vibrations. Although all of this stuff is very widely known, and you could just Google these topics and you would find more information and more research on them, but I'm giving credit to the people who have most recently shared with me and in groups some wellness tools, for our own recovery and resilience. So I'm passing that on. But so, for example, when we're in an anxious state, our breathing gets shallow. Let's say we're breathing in an anxious way, or even if we're grief-stricken, it's harder to take a deep breath. That feeling of a heavy weight on your chest with it. You might get when you feel like you're going to cry, or like you're so exhausted with grief that you can't cry. Just that heavy weight on your chest. The shallow breathing signals to our brain, to our deep brain, that things are not good right now, that we need to be in a fight or flight type of response. So within 5 minutes, that signals to our cardiovascular system that we need to ramp up to either run or fight. Within 11 minutes of breathing like that, there's measurable differences in the brain, and the blood flow to our neurotransmitters slows down, and we're pumping blood from our language centers and some other aspects of the brain we're pumping blood into our muscular system so that we can get ready to fight or to run away. And within 30 minutes, our endocrine system is affected. So adrenaline has ramped up. We're getting physically stronger, so we can do a burst of speed to run away, or we'll be stronger if we need to fight. All those things happen with grief, with anger, with fear, with worry, with stress, these kinds of emotions that I'm sure, I know I have, but a lot of us have been feeling more of late. And clearly we can see it in each other. We can see it collectively. Many of us have been in this level of stress that has an impact on the body, that has an impact and kind of creates its own loop of being in an adrenalized response for a long time now. So the neutral state we're trying to experience works with that same time frame. That's what I wanted to share in terms of the good news. This is why even 5 minutes of just being mindful about your breath. I mean, sometimes people have shared with me, I've shared with people close to me. Sometimes when someone's stressed out, we might say to each other, let's just breathe. And that sounds hokey, I'm sure, and it sounds like, how in the world is that going to help with the scale of things that are going on, global plague or sedition, or the things that are going on, the level of violence, the level of loss. It might not seem enough to just breathe. That's why I'm sharing with you the 5 minutes of slowing down my breathing so that it's not in that state, that shallowness that tells my body and my brain, hey, we're in danger. If I mindfully slow my breathing down, no matter how I feel. I might feel like breathing shallow. I might feel like running away. I might feel like fighting. But if I work through it and just make myself breathe slowly, that's going to signal to my cardiovascular system that we're not fighting and we're not running away. If I continue to do that, and some of us like to do that with prayer, some of us like to do that with, like I shared in Sex and Sacramenting, we can do that with devotional reading, Lectio Divina, we can do that with singing. For me, singing bypasses the rest. It helps sort of destigmatizes this process away from the heavy baggage that prayer and religious traditions can have sometimes. Just to sing, have to be mindful of your breath. It changes the way we breathe when we sing. So for me, and like Dr. Yellowbird was sharing, to chant or to sing can have this same impact. So within 11 minutes, instead of sending blood to our muscles so that we can fight or run away, the blood can come back to our brain. Our neurotransmitters can wire together again. And within 30 minutes, that adrenal response, that calms down as well. So this is one reason I'm just sharing this to say, regardless of what you believe, whether you believe there's a higher power or not, just being still with the body and focusing attention and breathing mindfully, those things alone, regardless of what you believe, can help you bring your body, which in turn will bring your brain, into this more neutral state of recovery. What happens instead, so here I'm drawing from Alex Howard, and he's drawing here from the work of Dr. Robert Navio. I do want to point to Alex Howard's, he has something called the Reset program. So he has a program that is, he's been sharing it of late for free, so you could Google that if you're interested. But I just wanted to say, so his is a trauma recovery and wellness program that is not rooted in prayer and meditation. It is more of a therapeutic trauma recovery program. And I want to give him credit. I'm citing him here. I'm not trying to, So anyway, so pointing in that direction where this particular slide came from his work. And he's drawing from Navio, as you see. So the reason I wanted to just take a minute and draw from him here is to just point out that those stress responses can happen even if we're not feeling emotionally anxious. Just the fact that we're in a biological stress environment, just the fact that there is a virus and has been, and we're exposed to it, even things like pollution in our environment, that kind of environmental chemical exposures, physical trauma that individuals among us, individually, we might have experienced if we've actually had COVID, or if we have other things we've survived, psychological trauma, experiencing loss, experiencing isolation. Those things alone are things that can trigger a stress response. So again, what I'm sharing here today is that, I hope that validates that if we're feeling anxious, or if we don't know why we're feeling anxious, or if we don't know why we're feeling tired and wired, this is why, we're going through it, whether we are mindful that we're going through it or not, whether we, it's stress overload. We're in stress overload, whether we feel it and are aware of it or not, we are. So these are times when, again, embodied mindfulness practices like prayer and meditation can really help us. These little slides or images come from Alex Howard, so I want to acknowledge that they have his little Reset System logo on them because they are his, so I am acknowledging that. This is just for educational purposes to say that, as he points out, when we're in this toxic stress or stress overload situation for kind of chronically, we may come up with some maladaptive responses that cause us to be, because we are more stressed out and our adrenaline is pumping and our brains aren't working in their best way. They don't have as much blood to them. The neurotransmitters aren't working in the same way. We may do things that are less helpful to us. I might even go so far as to say somewhat self-destructive. We're not doing them necessarily on purpose. We might be caught in a worry loop that causes us. I mean, I know I've done it too. You know, we might have more fitful sleep, and then that in turn makes it, you know, my thinking is even foggier. And so then I make not the best choices about how to cope with my stress. I might like stress eat. I might oversleep in the morning and then not be able to sleep. And, you know, it just creates a loop. And this is what he's trying to say in these different discussions of how we may have pain that's caused by chronic stress. It might be a reaction to the chronic stress we're under. And then we do things that sort of increase our stress load, and then we have more pain. Likewise with insomnia, likewise with worry, likewise with fatigue. You know, we're, as long as we're in that activated stress mode, in that adrenal response, in that middle, not the extreme danger one, but when we're chronically in that fight or flight mode, we're just going to continue to get less and less resourceful and more tired, and increase our own stress. It's hard to break the loop. So this is what we're looking at. And here I'm showing you again just a different model of Alex Howard cited this, but this also came from trauma recovery yogist training. And this is where I got my particular copy of this. But this is just a chart that shows you on the bottom, when we're not activated, we're able to be curious and open and playful and mindful and compassionate and grounded and in the present moment. That's when we're feeling safe. And from that state, we might notice things in the middle, things that are going on around us that frustrate us, that worry us. We might get activated. We might get a little bit more into that fight or flight mode. That's a body response. The main thing I wanted to share here is we're not doing something bad when we react to things like that. We're doing what our brain is doing what it's created to do, to signal to our body, hey, I need to do something to change and respond to what's going on around me. And that top mode is, again, when we're so stressed or things are so dangerous that we just numb out, we shut down, we can't deal with it. Our brain kind of goes out. Our brain is very far from that green state. It's very far from that state where it can be mindful. It can't really do that when it's in this mode. It's just focused on basic survival when it's up in that level of danger and stress. So the times when meditation, prayer, and those kinds of things might be the most helpful to us are when we're in that pink zone there, when we're feeling irritable. You know, I hang out with people who say when we're irritable, restless, and discontented, that's when we need to pause and somehow engage some of these tools of mindfulness, groundedness, being in the present moment. So the main thing here is there's no shame for getting into those states of being activated. We're not doing something wrong. We're just, our body's reacting the way that bodies do. Particularly if we've survived other life and death stressors, our bodies learned to protect us in those ways by sending those signals. So that's really what I'm showing you here, is how long-term stress can affect the body here. This is from Child Savers. This is another one of those learning experiences that ACEs Connection and ACEs Aware put out. Again, ACEs, ACES, for Adverse Child Experiences. So they've been sharing a lot of information about how the pandemics and the isolation of the pandemic is affecting children, particularly school children. Of course, it's affecting parents and educators as well. And then, you know, those stressed caregivers, it's harder for us to help our children be resilient or our students be resilient when we ourselves are also suffering the same. Suffering might be too strong, or we're experiencing the same stressors that the kids are experiencing. So this was put out by Child Savers, this little image here, just to show us that being in chronic stress this ongoing stressful environment that we can't totally fix at this point. We have to learn how to be resilient and be in it, even though it's stressful. It can have these kinds of effects on us. So I want to look primarily at the brain there. It's normal for us to have difficulty concentrating right now, to have mood swings, to have mind fog, to be depressed. And then it even has these physical symptoms that you might see there. So it affects our skin. We may have more hair loss. Our skin we might have acne and or dry skin. Little cuts and bruises take longer to heal because our cells are signaling us that they need, that they're doing other things right now instead of being focused on recovery and growing. They're like, we're in danger. We got to protect life. Anyway, you can see all the things. We tend to have higher cholesterol and higher blood pressure at times like this. We'll tend to have more pain because we'll have increased inflammation and tension in the joints and muscles. Can we constrict that cardiovascular constriction that was on an earlier slide? So that causes us to feel more tense and more strained. All kinds of different things go on in the gut, but the digestive system is not working optimally when we're stressed because we're in fight or flight mode. So that can affect different ones of us in different parts of the spectrum of digestive issues, as you can see there, but it can cause all kinds of discomfort and irritability of the digestive system. The last thing I wanted to show about this also comes from Child Savers, so I'm very thankful to them for all the wonderful resources and tools that they've been sharing to help educators and parents help kids right now during the pandemic. But one of the things they wanted to share is to remind us that toxic stress, trauma, those kinds of things, those are things we can build resilience for and we can recover from. And in the meantime, they do affect the brain in the same kinds of ways that brain injury affects the brain. Okay, so I'm not saying that to be scary, like they always are. The whole reason we're meeting all the time, the whole reason Child Savers is putting out all these great tools is because we can recover from this. It's not like an irreparable injury. It's not meant to be scary. It's just acknowledging if our kids are struggling right now, if we're struggling right now, this is why, because our brain is sustaining injurious levels of stress right now that we can recover from, but it is happening. So it's not something we can just wish away or, power drive our way through or just be a tough guy and it won't affect us. That's not, no. I mean, the stress affects us in these kinds of ways. So as you can see on the left side of the brain, the way that this kind of level of stress, chronic toxic stress, can affect us is we'll have difficulty understanding words, difficulty expressing ourselves, and we'll have trouble remembering things that we've said, read, heard. Our logic is impaired. Our ability to sequence things, put things in orders is stressed. On the right-hand side, it's harder for us to focus. So again, prayer and meditation, as we saw in those other brain scans, they help us to focus. So they can be useful to counteract this level of stress. We'll have memory issues. We'll be less aware that our brain is not functioning as well as it normally does. So people might see it in us better than we can see it in ourselves. It's harder for us to pull back and see the big picture. When we're stressed out like this, little things get a lot of focus from us. Maybe not blowing things out of proportion is something that can happen. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But so being able to pull back and see the big picture is harder. It takes more work. Again, meditation, prayer, those things can actually help us be able to do this again. And then our ability to be creative, our imagination, even our perception of music can be affected when we're this stressed. Again, we can recover from these things, but again, that's why talking about embodied mindfulness practices that can help us reset the brain a bit or help it be resilient when we're experiencing this kind of stress. So some of the things that we do when some of the go-to behaviors, again, this comes from Alex Howard, so I want to thank him for that. But some of the things that we'll do instead, it will just sort of default to if we're not mindful and skillful about, okay, this is happening, this level of stress is happening, how can I help myself in this situation? If we don't do that, it's more likely that we will, may have a tendency to blame ourselves for being stressed out or for not being able to fix these things that are stressing us out. And kind of the go-to behaviors are, if I just do the right things and if I can just somehow control things, or if I can plan ahead somehow and worry about this enough, somehow I can get this all under control and things will be better. So it takes the forms of sort of being someone who's trying to help all the time, someone who's trying to accomplish things all the time, who's trying to do things perfectly, who's worrying or anxious about, if I can just only know what was going to happen, somehow that would make things better, if I can be in control. Mindfulness practices, especially in the areas of meditation and prayer, depending on what your traditions are, those can really be an alternative to these behaviors, because they do tend to encourage us to remember, wait a minute, I am loved no matter what I do, or I am lovable no matter what I do, and I'm not in control. Maybe there's either I'm willing to live in the present moment and know that, be here now, this is all there is that I can really be in. I can't really be in the future. I can't be in the past anymore. I can only be here now. And some forms of prayer and meditation for some of us connect us to a higher power and remind us that we're not the highest power in the universe. There are other, maybe it could just simply be gravity, but there's other things besides myself that I don't have control of and I'm not going to have control of. So prayer and meditation can help reset that body-brain connection back down from that adrenaline response and help us recover from the effects of trauma and chronic stress. And when they're still going on like they are right now collectively for us, they can at least help us build resilience. So like I already said, I just do want to be real clear here. When we're in that protective collapse freeze state, we cannot access prayer and meditation in ways that are helpful. And Roland Ball has put out some material about that. You could Google his name. He's been putting some things out recently about, just be mindful. Don't tell someone that's having a freeze response or a dorsal vagal response that's in severe trauma. Don't tell them that they need to meditate and breathe through it in terms of deep meditation, because that will be counterproductive. That will, could even be harmful. So we don't want to spend extended silence with somebody that's in a, terrified state, right? That's too much. So we do want to be mindful of when and how to use these tools, and to be gentle with ourselves and with each other at the times that what we really just need is basic self-care and support. And I hope that makes sense. So before I get into prayer and meditation, I've already mentioned reset. I've also mentioned trauma recovery yoga. What I have here is from somatic experiencing. So with thanks to Peter Levine and all the folks that do that, this particular graphic comes from PESI, and they put out some free tools and some free materials for trauma recovery, evidence-based trauma recovery. They are associated with Bessel van der Kolk, if you know his work. So anyway, this particular tool shows us an example that these evidence-based self-regulation tools all do. They use different words for it. They use different acronyms for it, but basically meditation, prayer, and these different bodily forms of regulating the system back down. They all do the same things in terms of they have us pause or slow down. They have us drop back into our body, engage the body, a little body scan. They have us orient ourselves. Where am I now? What's really going on right now? So very simple things like looking at your feet, looking around the room. I'm doing it right now. But looking around the room, you might look at the different corners of the room, look for 4 different colors, look for 4 different textures. Orient yourself in the space that you're in, so you can be here and now. Grounding yourself, noticing again, you might look at your feet, you might look at your hands, notice the connection of your feet to the floor, notice where you're sitting, the connection of your back and your seat, your thighs to whatever you're sitting upon, right? Centering yourself, maybe even, resting your hands on your chest or your heart region, and just noticing that center space of your body. Breathing, that mindful breath. So, the other day I was using this with someone I love very much, and we did a thing that's called box breathing, but sort of like 1, pause, 2, breathe out, 3, pause, breathe in, 1, breathe, pause, breathe in. So the 3, so the 4 sides of the box, if you can understand. So this is the breathe in on the 1, hold it on the 2, breathe out on the 3, hold it on the 4. You're not really holding it, you're just pausing. But anyway, so whatever tools you want to use, there's all kinds of tools for mindful breathing, and just even noticing, you can just simply notice, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh suggests, the Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is another therapeutic evidence-based practice or school of thought that uses mindfulness and meditation in these sort of somatic, evidence-based, non-theistic kind of ways. So I also was drawing a little bit from Qigong here. Neuroplasticity is what we've been talking about this whole time. This is why it works. By changing your thoughts, by being aware of your breath, by pausing and slowing down, you can change the brain's functioning and its structure, as we saw at the very beginning with the brain scans. You actually can change the brain's structure by helping, as one of my friends likes to say, the paths that fire together, wire together. The neural paths that fire together, wire together. But I'll show you a brain scan at the very end, but you can actually build connections between those 2 hemispheres of the brains and sort of thicken the healthy pathways of the brain by mindfully making these connections. And as I think it's Alex Howard, I do have him quoted there. As Alex Howard likes to say, the feeling of safety exists in the body, not in the mind. You can't think your way to feeling safe. The friends that I meditate with most all say you can't think your way to right living, but you can live your way to right thinking. And I don't know, it doesn't seem intuitive maybe, but the point is that neuroscience does tell us this is true, that we can't, when our brain is stressed out, it can't help us get out of that state. It actually works better whether you're using Qigong, like I was showing you on the last slide. That's Qigong master Ming Tong Gu, that has some really good work out there about this. But what the things we do in the body, whether it's Qigong, whether it's yoga, whether it's mindful breathing, walking meditation, it really doesn't matter what it is. Using the body to signal to our brain that we're not in danger by slow mindful movement or slow mindful breath and quiet will help our brain regulate back down. So I have a lot more on this slide than that, but that's the gist of it. One other little bit of science, and this is going back a ways, but there's also some really early neuroscience for the United States and Europe, at least early. I want to acknowledge here that Chinese medicine goes back thousands of years, as does indigenous wisdom. So when Master Gu or Dr. Yellowbird are talking, they're drawing into much older traditions, as Dr. Yellowbird explicitly mentions. These Western theories of neuroscience are like in the toddler stage, whereas the Chinese and indigenous practices are, you know, sage elders of thousands of years. So that's why I'm saying with a chuckle still, like this Western science does go back before somatic experiencing, and some of the newer stuff that we were just looking at in the last few slides, it goes back to William James, who initially was trained in medical physiology. You might know him as a philosopher or psychologist. He's best known for varieties of religious experience, but in fact, he was initially trained as a physiologist. So my point there is just to say that, again, they noticed even back in the at the cusp of the 20th century, Carl Lang and William James noticed that people were able to act themselves into a new way of feeling. And that was a revolutionary thought for Western scientists, because at that point, they had always believed that our traumatic experiences cause us to have these emotional reactions, and those emotional reactions then guide our behavior. Think of Freud. Okay, so that was how people were thinking. You know, your Oedipal complex, or your the way you were potty trained or something like that, that was going to, you know, that has such traumatic effects on you that you're reacting to that the whole rest of your life. That was Western medicine. The James Lang theory pushed even Westerners out of that rut to some degree, and, you know, helped bring some of us forward to where indigenous people and Chinese teachers and Indian teachers had been for, when I say the teachers of yoga and so on, had been for like many thousands of years. We're coming along now. So I just wanted to show you that, and just show you that one of the things that they noticed was that when people had some kind of a belief in a higher power, whatever that might be, that was something as well that seemed to help them have a different sense of who they are. So if this is right at the very end, if I'm feeling stuck in what I've done in the past and what's happened to me, when I'm like an object, this is how my past has shaped me. I'm stuck there. These early psychotherapists found, and neurologists found, that when people could think of themselves as an I, that I am part of something else. I am here now, and I'm connected to something higher that can help me make better decisions. I'm not trapped by my past. I'm not just a product of my environment, my past. That could be very healing for them. So again, I'm just bringing that up because this is, again, a different kind of scientific angle, behavioral science and physiology, that was showing that if we can connect to a higher power, that can be helpful. So these are basically some tools here. This is where I'm going to close with this. I went over a lot of these in Sex and Sacrament and did guided practice of these. Now I'm telling you, again, even if that's not your cup of tea, I was drawing back then a lot of the Christian medieval mystical traditions in many cases, in many of those guided practices. So that may not be your thing. Just sharing that regardless of belief, this is why those things work. So when we recognize what state our nervous system is in, we can notice I'm in fight or flight mode, or I'm not in fight or flight mode, I'm feeling okay. If we can kind of do we can use a body scan meditation, a very simple meditation of, you know, how am I feeling? Some people do chakra alignment, or just I know that might be a little woo-woo for some people, but some of us do that. All right. It might be just in the beginning of seated meditation, maybe in a Zen practice. It can be an autogenic training experience. That's the experience that I'll guide in connection with this little sharing that I'm doing now. Is completely neutral. It's an evidence-based practice that's not even spiritual at all, unless you want it to be, and then you can take it there in your own head. But the verbal cues are neutral. They don't bring in spirituality overtly at all. Yeah, it doesn't. They don't exclude it, but they don't bring it in. So anyway, any kind of body scan could work for that. Another thing that mindfulness and prayer practices can do that help reset the body is they help us think about, why am I in this state? Whatever, if I'm in fight or flight, what's going on? What's causing that? So I think of Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness practices here. He has, some really good, just sort of noticing your breath and being aware, and walking meditation. His cues for walking meditation are amazing. Especially, he has one called the Long Journey Home. Very little book, but really any of his tools, that he has little things in there for self-examination. But any good Zen teacher could guide you through that. In a Christian tradition, the ones I shared in Sex and Sacrament were the prayer of recollection, or the Examen prayer. But it's kind of a little mini confessional prayer. I had a bookmark that it's part of my Sex and Sacrament book, but it has like 5 little questions on it. It's sort of a mini Examen, just noticing how you're feeling and thinking about it, and a little inventory tool, spot check inventory. Some may know that phrase. Another thing that prayer and meditation can do is it can help stop our unhelpful thought. It can retrain the brain to think in a different way. You can kind of just be aware of what your brain's thinking if you're sort of a negative loop, and choose to shift your thinking in a different kind of direction. So there's some wonderful DBT tools for that. Using affirmations. You don't have to feel those things when you're doing it. You're saying those things like, oh, I'm looking in the mirror and I love myself. It's very hard to feel sometimes, but just doing that anyway can help reset the brain. One of the ones I like the best is just doing gratitude lists. And again, you don't have to believe any specific kind of thing to say grace or write a gratitude list. Theists and non-theists alike do those things. For those of us who are theists, we can do those in terms of prayers of thanks. Another wonderful tool for stopping unhelpful thoughts for me is loving kindness meditation. I don't mean it's just for me, it's one of my favorites, okay? So metta, or loving kindness meditation in the Buddhist tradition, is a wonderful tool for, noticing what our thoughts are, and choosing to focus them toward love, regardless of how we feel about someone. It walks us through how we feel towards someone that we are grateful toward, and then, towards ourselves, towards someone that we don't really have any feelings about one way or another and don't know well, to someone with whom we have conflict. Could be a lot of people right now. I often think of, pretty wide scale conflict, not necessarily people I know personally, but people that it's helpful to me to use that tool of loving kindness meditation and pray for people. May you be happy, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, when they're people that I'm scared of or angry at or distrustful of. It's a wonderful practice to get me through that, and be able to see it a different way, and then to pray for, everyone in the local neighborhood, and extending on out to all the creatures in the universe, all living beings. Another thing that evidence-based practices tell us is helpful for resetting, getting through these stressful times and into some resilience and recovery, is to process to let our emotions come through us and work themselves out. In other words, to not necessarily have to push them away and pretend we don't have them. Also, not to be trapped in them or controlled by them, but to let them pass through, like water, just flow through, and be able to let go of them. But we can only let go of them if we actually let them go through. I think of that expression, the only way out is through. It seems like with emotions, sometimes that's the same way. So again, the tools of inventory, prayer, recollection, Examen, loving kindness meditation, which is totally different, but it's a way to acknowledge feelings and let them go, even as we choose a different way to respond, or choose a different way to think, at least. May you be happy, may you be well. I may not feel it, but if I'm willing to say it and just sit with it in silence, it may transform the situation. And that gets to that last one. So the last goal of the evidence-based practices from from back up here, even the ones that are not prayer and meditation, one of their goals is to transform our present experience of being in this stress, to transform our self-understanding and to transform our relationships with other people so that we don't have to stay stuck in these loops of stress and trauma. It may not make the external factors go away, but maybe that will help our brain and body be able to endure and respond in more effective and resilient ways. And we may be able to feel somewhat better, at least sometimes, even as we're navigating through these stressful times together. So some of the tools that I thought of here for prayer and meditation practices that might be good for that are body prayers. There's a Lord's prayer body prayer that comes from New Zealand. You can look that up online, and you can actually follow along with shared guided practice of the Lord's Prayer if that's your tradition. I was speaking to a group that included a lot of Christians, so I mentioned this. There's a practice called Holy Yoga. That's Christian folks who practice yoga asanas, but they use Christian words. Zen mindful movements. Again, I'm thinking here of Thich Nhat Hanh, but not only Thich Nhat Hanh. Kriya Yoga, Yogananda's disciples, I think of, also Krishnacharya's disciples. Come through. There's many lineages. He influenced Ashtanga yoga. Not indirectly, but his lineage goes forward in it has many different branches, I guess is what I'd say. So almost all of us that practice yoga in the West probably come through that lineage of Kriya Yoga in some way. Trauma recovery yoga, trauma sensitive yoga. Trauma sensitive yoga comes from Bessel van der Kolk's work. Chen Qi Qigong. So there are lots of different ways to engage our bodies and transform our present experience, even though we're still in these stressful times. One of those, like I mentioned earlier, is music making as well. It doesn't have to be singing. It could be chanting. It can be hymn singing. It could be just playing an instrument. But in any way that we make music, this comes from the work of Dr. Patel here. And he cites on his slide, these are some slides from a presentation he shared, as you can see, at One Day University. I'm trying to cite the sources here where folks are passing along their knowledge and helping other people be resilient in these times. But as he was explaining, making music at least once every 2 weeks seems to be associated with preventing cognitive decline and building resilience. And there's some wonderful stuff. You can see trailers from a couple different movies about music in the brain with aging populations and folks that have cognitive, like folks that have Alzheimer's, dementia, different issues that have caused them to not have as much access to their language centers a lot of the time, and not be able to socialize a lot of the time. But when they're able to hear and make music that comes from their past, they light up and are actually able to not only sing and move, but even talk and answer in dialogue. You can see it almost immediately, the effect that music and music making can have on a person's brain, and that's cumulative. So in the sense that, as you can see here, if someone's doing it pretty consistently every 2 weeks or so, there's measurable changes in the brain. And on the right hand side, it shows that what I was saying before about the neurons that fire together, wire together. The two pictures there are neural bundles in the brain on the left hand side of a non-singer, and on the right hand side, that is a singer, someone that is building more neural networks that are ongoing. They know that exist past the song. Neural bundles growing, seemingly related to the practice of making music. So I'm going to stop here. I didn't mean to go on this long. I hope that's meaningful to somebody. And I will do a guided practice that's going to be a separate video. Thank you. Okay. Sorry. I need to slow this down. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Thank you for sharing that time with me.